So good morning again, everyone. I hope you can all see the screen that says gaining a competitive advantage. So we talked about customer, we also talked about clients. One of the slight pains in my life is that some people have customers, some people have clients. Some of our customers actually have customers and clients, where they have a differentiate between the two. And certainly it's employees and staff. So we tend to talk about customers, but we're very careful when we're working with organisations to use the terminology that's relevant for them. So just to run through today about what is this thing about customer experience that a lot of people are talking about, but also a reality check, because I think it's one of those areas that's being a little bit overhyped at the moment. A lot of organisations are saying, "Oh, this is the new way of doing things," but actually, there are some checks and balances. We've been going for 15 years, so just a couple of the lessons from that, and then really sort of what does good look like. Just a little bit of advert for us. So we help improve profitability through better customer experience, and that's really around looking at customer retention, customer acquisition, and also employee engagement. And I think one of the areas that we find in a lot of businesses, particularly smaller businesses, is they have the focus on some of the customer work, they focus on some of the employee work, but they don't necessarily join the gap. So the internal, the external doesn't always get aligned. So we work with them in terms of helping with those. We've talked to more than 3 million people in terms of getting their views, and we also have an award system where we have a gold, silver, or bronze award, and that, say, we've worked with more than 300 businesses on that. And what we do is, our competitive advantage is we look at 4 key areas. How do you understand customer needs? How do you meet customer needs? And sometimes we'll find that actually you can get a higher score for meeting customer needs than you do for understanding them. And that's where you've got a product or service which is very much on the, it meets the mass market need, but it's not being personalized. It's not being, it doesn't feel, it's not the what's in it for me, as I think Leslie or Carol said earlier. What does that mean in terms of delighting customers rather than just merely satisfying them? Or what does that mean in terms of loyalty? And saying that we put together a comprehensive action plan in terms of where the gaps are and how to solve those, and also an award which can be used in marketing to show your customer centricity. I'm going to get too bogged down in terms of IIC, but happy to talk to anybody after that or after this, or separately about what we do. So what's the fuss about? There's a lot of talk about the moment we are in the age of the customer. So if you go back the last 100 years, Henry Ford and mass production in the early 90s, and that was really sort of the way businesses focused for a long time. It was all around how can we automate more processes, how can we sort of develop more products. And then as the world became smaller in the 60s and going through, it became a lot more about where's the global connectivity, transport, open borders. Notwithstanding Brexit, the EU obviously opened up lots of areas in Europe, but as did other trade deals. So then it became, well, how do we actually work with people outside of our own little environment? And then the internet revolution in the 90s. So that became very much in terms of, well, where's the information? People became much more switched on. They could get information much more readily. And a lot of the focus then was around building websites, was around how do we actually communicate with people. And now, really, from in the last sort of 8 years, we're in the world of the customer. And I think a lot of organisations are now looking at a lot of our products and services are fairly homogenous. There's not a huge amount of difference. Actually, the difference is how well do we treat our customers, and similarly, how well do we treat our staff and our employees in terms of making sure we're a good place to work. But I think one of the key areas there is the power balance has shifted. So customers are in control. They're better informed, they're more demanding, they're digitally connected, and they're able to switch. So I think one of the other areas there is that the distance is no object in terms of our competitors. So I have an IFA who's looking at me at the moment, happens to be local, happen to meet him on a regular basis, but actually I could have an IFA from anywhere from Land's End to John O'Groats these days. So, and a lot of organisations are saying, well, actually, we can now expand much more in terms of where we're operating and what we're doing. And one of the areas there that, okay, I'll just move on. So, where they're looking at there is in terms of well, what's going to make that different? So I talk a lot about, you know, who do you compete with at the moment? And one of the questions in the days when I was sort of talking at conferences was getting people to put their hands up. I mean, how many people compete with Amazon? And one of the, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, no, we don't compete with Amazon. Actually, everybody competes with Amazon and some of those companies these days because they're setting the expectation. Things like response times, just come up to Christmas, you know, I probably know our Amazon Prime and our local Hermes delivery person more than anybody else, because he knocks on my front door 3 times a day because my girls keep ordering stuff or then having stuff collected to take back. It's a totally different world to the days of, you know, sort of 28 days delivery. You know, people expect quicker times, and that, you know, in whatever business they're in, people want instant responses. They also want ease. Ease of doing business is one of the key areas that a lot of organizations focus on. If you don't make it easy for people to do business with you, they're going to move elsewhere. And also around multiple channels. So the big thing there is around, you know, giving people the opportunity to do business with you in the way they want to do business with you, rather than how you want to do business with them. And that is having an effective website. There's a lot of talk. I'm a little bit skeptical about chatbots and artificial intelligence at the moment. I think it works in some areas, but doesn't work in others. But people want to have access. You know, your customers are going to be doing business with you 24 hours a day now, 7 days a week, even if you're not there. So how do you actually make that easy? And how do you give them the options? I think one of the biggest frustrations we find from customers, particularly when we do work around digital transformation and how online experiences are, is I can never find a phone number. So if I get into difficulties, I can never actually find a call to make. And I think that's one of the key areas that, you know, you've got to give multiple channels. You've got to give people sort of more than one opportunity to make contact with you and do business with you. But the world has changed, and I think, you know, there's a view that the pandemic has accelerated the speed of change by 5 years. A lot of organisations were thinking about home working, was certainly thinking about video conferencing. I mean, it's been around for years, but it's never really taken off. And there was a lot of resistance. So, you know, I think there will be certain genies that are now out of the bottle that don't actually they get back put in. Doctors, very, very resistant in the past for any doctors to be doing online views. I think actually now going forward, even when, you know, we are allowed to get back in, I think we'll be in a situation where, you know, basic consultancies will be able to be done over the phone or over Zoom. I think a lot of businesses, I said, you know, other businesses, our business, I was spending, as I said earlier, probably 2-3 days a week out with clients, often up in the north, so spending time overnight, so going to meetings, trying to get some more meetings in there. I do all of those by Zoom now. And when we can get back to travel, I'll probably be more selective, and our clients will be more selective in terms of whether or not they actually wanted to come and meet them. And so there are organisations that have adapted well. Amazon, as I mentioned, they've just opened a shop in Ealing, which is now till-less. So it's totally on trust. You go in there, it's not even, you don't even have to scan anything, just pick it up, put it in the basket, and you get automatically charged for it. Aviva is an interesting one. Amanda Blanc at Aviva has come out this week with an announcement that they're going to look for only policies and investments that are sustainable. There's a lot of talk about the ESG environmental measures, and that's a big issue at the moment in financial services, we're finding, because they found that their customers are demanding that they want their investments to go into sustainable products. So, you know, they have to follow that. Deliveroo's changed the world of some of the sort of takeaway side. I won't go through all of these, sort of the fairly obvious, but just a couple. Qantas, what do you do with a fleet of airlines when nobody's allowed to travel? They've actually started sightseeing tours. So you actually have a 2-hour flight in Australia where they go, and it's actually, you take off and land at the same airport, but they do, and they say low level, but obviously sort of within reason, but they'll actually do trips around. So they do, you know, sort of 2-hour opportunities to go and do some sightseeing. Mercedes-Benz are another one who are interesting in terms of, again, this is all based on what their customers want. Mercedes-Benz are trying at the moment a leasing scheme where you don't actually lease a specific car, you lease a Mercedes, and that Mercedes can be changed whenever you want. So it's picking up on the, you know, a family, got 2 girls in their 20s. You know, sometimes I need a 4x4, but other times I might want a sports car. So their leasing model that they're looking at is saying, okay, so on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, you can actually go and change the car from a 4x4 going away for the weekend. I can have a little sports car because I'm just going away, with my wife or whatever. Or actually, we're going to have a family trip down to the West Country, whatever. So we need a bigger car. So it's actually looking at that sort of, no longer are you restricted to one car. Your lease will then cover any cars you want, and it's that type of flexibility, and that's really sort of looking at sort of what it is their customers want. If you'd asked me this 12 months ago, I'd have had these three companies as one of the exemplars of what they're really good at. John Lewis had a huge, fantastic reputation for customer service and really working with employees. That's diminished. Virgin Atlantic had some very, very bad press in terms of looking for government bailouts. First Direct, still good, it's a reasonable service, but they're being taken over. They're being caught up by other organisations. Now, I don't think any of those brands are particularly in trouble, but they could quite easily go the way of Thomas Cook, Woolworths, Kodak, Blockbuster, a whole host of other organisations who they failed to understand what it was their customers wanted, and they thought they could carry on doing what they'd always done. And obviously, we know where they are now because they're nowhere. So we have an area we talk about in terms of, we don't satisfy customers, we delight them. And some of the areas we've looked at. So what is it? What's the difference between customer service and customer experience for a start? So it's focusing on the overall experience. So that's before the customer even comes near you. What's the, in terms of your online presence, in terms of your advertising, in terms of your way, what is it you're trying to say about the organization? What is it in terms of focusing on the customer? Where's in it? Why should I spend my money with you rather than somebody else? Key thing is then what happens during that transaction, but it's also what happens after it. And I think a lot of organisations and some of the poor scores that we get when we measure this is fine. It was great up until the point of sale, but the minute we made the sale, then they forgot about us. They moved on to somebody else, and it's that whole experience is around the before, during, and after. And some of the things that really means is be transparent, be very open up front, manage those expectations in terms of what do people expect. I mean, Chris will know from the financial services and particularly from the IFA side, there's been a lot of talk around transparency. That's mainly around fees, but it's also about the types of service, and that's also about what you can do and what you can't do. Personalizing the proposition as much as possible in terms of how do I make it fit if it's designed for me. We all know that the vast majority of products and services, it's a bit like an iceberg. The sort of 95% of it's underwater. That's going to be the same for everybody. What's that 5% that's visible that's really going to make it different, to make it feel as if it's for me? Anticipate needs, we talk about a lot, and that tends to be the weakest element for most of the organizations we work with. And that's people who are looking at saying, well, actually, as a customer, I don't know what I don't know. Can you help me? Can you actually look and what is it that I might also need? Just look beyond the sort of the face-to-face area. We talked about managing expectations, but it's also important in terms of exceeding expectations and really over delivering wherever you can. Keeping promises, again, one of the most regular areas we get in terms of poor customer satisfaction is where people don't do the things they say they're going to do, and also in terms of maintaining contact. So it's that how do you keep in touch with people, and even if it's on a transactional basis, how do you do that? Now, a lot of that sometimes is finding ways of how do we find things? So we work with insurance companies a lot. Typically, their interaction with the customer is a once-a-year renewal. But what can they do during the course of that year to start thinking about other things? There's a strong commercial case. I'm not going to get too much into terms of numbers, but there is very clear evidence that if you do delight customers, they're going to stay with you longer, but also they're going to be less price sensitive. So it's not an excuse to rip them off, but they are going to be with you for longer. They're going to become less expensive to maintain because they don't determine, well, they're not going to complain, but also they're an open market. It's pushing an open door in terms of being receptive to additional services, and they're also recommending. We do a lot with Net Promoter. Net Promoter, everyone would have had how likely are you to recommend this business to others, which is around Net Promoter. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But again, they are going to be out there to recommend you to other people. And conversely, if you're bad, they'll be telling other people not to come with you. And they'll also put up with occasional errors. That's not again, not to encourage people to make errors, but they will be forgiving. They see it as being a partnership, but they're delighted. They actually want you to succeed, and therefore, they'll help you with that. But of course, if they're unhappy, they're receptive to switching. And one of the things we found is that customers will switch pretty much on a whim these days. There is limited loyalty. Certain areas where people sort of stay for other reasons, but they tend to go, within a year of first coming in contact with you, they'd be looking at other things. Unhappy customers are more expensive to maintain because they take up a lot of management or customer time or staff time in terms of dealing with their issues. They won't even think about anything else if they're unhappy, and they're more likely to badmouth your business to others. And to say they're going to complain at every opportunity. So obviously, from a commercial case, there's a lot of talk about ROI, and there's a number of things. I'm more than happy to share those, some of the ROI stats in terms of theirs, but some of these are slightly exaggerated, and some of them sort of like designed by consultants to sell particular services. So I take those with a little bit of a pinch of salt. It's a bit like the survey that came out this week from that somebody said that 85% of UK workers are desperate to get back into the office, and it turned out that was commissioned by the chairman of Canary Wharf Holdings, who presumably wants everybody to come back into not just his offices, but also to spend money in the shops in Canary Wharf. So, but there is a reality check with this. So, whilst we focus on the customer, we really want to make sure that customers are treated fairly and looked after at every opportunity. Finding out and actually asking them is a key. So we've been going for 15 years. 70% of managers and employees rate the customer experience they provide higher than their customers do. So in all of the work we've done for sort of 300 plus companies, the vast majority of those, their managers think they're doing a far better job than they actually are. And they also think their employee engagement is far better than it actually is. There is a little bit of delusion within these areas, and that's often they don't ask, or they actually do some work themselves. They do some internal surveys or do some internal assessments, and they hear what they want to hear effectively. So that independent verification, looking at sort of, well, actually what's really behind this, and how does that, even if it's a good score, it may not be that good. How does it compare to other people? So having that independent analysis and the verification is one of the areas that people really need to look at. But there's also some of the areas about in terms of the customer. It was Mr. Selfridge back in the day who came up with the customer is always right. I tend not to agree with that, because actually we all know the customer isn't always right. The customer is entitled to their opinion, and they should all be treated with respect. But actually, it doesn't mean that you've got to give in to every request they have in terms of bending over backwards. What are the financial implications? Sometimes actually it is better to say no politely and professionally. What's the impact on other customers and employees? One of the things we often talk about when we're developing customer experience strategies for firms is, okay, so do we have A, B, and C customers? Yes, every business has got A, B, and C customers. They're the ones who are worth more in terms of the value, but actually think about the impact. So we work with organizations, we work with a large manufacturing company, and one of the areas they have is around stock control, and that's one of the problems. The temptation there is, well, actually, if we're running out of stock, we'll make sure we reserve the stock for our better customers. Well, that's fine in terms of keeping those customers, but what's the impact on the other customers? Are they going to go elsewhere? So think about what can be done. Are some of their requests sustainable? So you do it once as a favor for somebody, but actually, can you keep on doing it? Because once you've done it once, they're going to want you to do it again and again. So can you? And is it even possible? And that's, we work in financial services quite a lot, and quite a lot of the regulated industries there. Actually, they get asked by their customers to do things that aren't possible. They're actually not allowed to do it. One of those areas is for some of the organisations is around that sort of gap between advice and help. And particularly in some of the contact centres, people need to be very, helpful. They're trying to be there, but actually they're not trained advisors, so they can't. There's a line which they cannot cross, and that can be very frustrating for the customer when the customer thinks, well, actually, you're not telling me what's going on. What do I need to do? And they can't cross that line in terms of giving advice. So it's really looking at some of the areas about how that can be done, and that's setting expectations up front quite a lot. And of course, the key one from a commercial point of view is, there's no point in having lots of customers if you're not actually making money. If you're losing money on all those customers, then what's the point? I mentioned earlier the regulatory reality, and most sectors have got regulation. Financial services is slightly stricter than others, but as I say, the regulator, the customer may have different requirements in terms of what they want. But I think there's also that area in terms of the customers don't know what they don't know. So it's actually, how can you help them? How can you really sort of guide them through some of the areas? And I know from some of the stuff that Chris does for me, he's very good in that respect in terms of explaining what can't be done and can be done. It might be wonderful for me to sort of avoid paying as much tax as possible, but Chris as my advisor will sort of say, well, actually, there's certain things you can't to get away from. So I mentioned in terms of help and advice, but also it's the I think with the regulation reality, I think a lot of people get forced down that sort of, oh, we've got to do this because the regulator tells us. Actually, things like treating customer fairly, it may be a financial or an FCA sort of imperative, but actually you should treat customers fairly, whether the regulator tells you to do it or not. And one of the other areas there is saying no. Sometimes you always have to say no to customers, but actually it's no, but it's much better. So what are the alternatives? So can you do alternatives? Is there something else that could be done instead? If not, don't be afraid to walk away. If you can't do it, you're far more likely to get that customer back in the future if you're honest and open with them and say, well, actually, we don't do this, or even recommend a competitor and say, well, actually, we'd recommend you went to here. They're more likely to think well of you rather than trying to do something and put together something which then goes wrong, and then you'll never see them again, but also they tell other people about it. And one of the other areas there is around the, not everyone's the same. We talked about personalization. So when we do customer journey mapping for organizations, which is when customers start with the organization all the way through to staying with you and repeat business, actually look at the different types of persona. What are those different types of customer? I think somebody touched on it in the round robin earlier in terms of, it's very important to understand sort of the different needs and what are the individual journeys, but what are the key touch points in terms of the moments of truth or the moments that matter, because we have lots of different touch points, but actually which are the really ones that are going to make a difference, and what are the emotions at that point? So we work with organizations in terms of emotional intelligence and really understanding that, but also in terms of where's the collaboration within the different departments. There's no point if we work with IT companies, there's no point the software people, the sales people selling something which the IT people can't deliver. So it's actually that sort of making sure there's the consistency and you get those handovers between the different teams and departments, so that you're not looking at sort of lots of different silos. And again, one of the frustrations that we find, and certainly from a personal point, I find is if you're talking to different teams, having to go through the same information. I understand that I might need to do a couple of security checks if it's in certain sectors, but do I really need to give them all of my details and actually go right the way back to square one to tell them everything again? Where is that handover and where's that internal communication? So in terms of the 15 years we've been in, some of the things we've picked up, customer loyalty isn't the same as retention. I think that's one of the strongest areas. I remember sitting in a boardroom in Nottingham with a software company that did payroll software, where we were giving them some fairly bad news in terms of the results, and the chairman was very much, no, we've got customers for years. We've had all these customers. They must be happy. They've stayed with us a long time. And we then put together a program, and I actually did face-to-face interviews with a number of their clients. Every single one of them said the same thing. We are here because we just cannot, the thought of changing our payroll system is just so great that we can't actually, we don't want to do it. We move away from this tomorrow. It doesn't work. We've got lots of workarounds. And that was really, they were sitting there, and that's, you know, we got lots of happy customers because they've been with us for a long time. Well, no, they're there because they can't go. Now that's changing in terms of obviously some of those areas. But again, don't get, you know, just because customers are with you doesn't necessarily mean that they're with you because you're actually sort of delighting them. It could be there because, you know, they don't see an alternative, or they're just inertia in some cases. Solving a customer's problem makes a real difference, especially when it isn't your fault. And that's an area, and I've talked about Pilkington. We work a lot with Pilkington Glass. They're more than happy for me to talk about them, and because they've changed their business a lot in terms of focusing on the customer. And some of the work we did with them, where we looked at sort of, you know, what are the issues facing your business. A lot of that was around recycling. So obviously there's offcuts of glass. It was a real pain for their clients or their customers to actually sort of do that, because obviously it's commercial, got to pay for that. So they started for their certain clients, you know, they tested a pickup thing. So, you know, when they were delivering glass, but they were also picking up some of the offcuts, and that made a real difference in terms of loyalty, because whilst, you know, it then gave them a problem, they then had to get rid of it themselves. But it actually was a real service that drove loyalty. They weren't charging for that. They weren't, it wasn't done on a, we've got to make some money out of this, but it was done in terms of, you know, our customers have got a problem. How can we help them? How can we make their lives easier? And in doing so, tie them into us. Little simple changes can make a big difference. And we worked with a client who, again, based on the feedback we got, that it was a distribution company, and they had a couple of satellite offices which shut at 5 o'clock. And the feedback there was you know, we're really annoyed that we can't get through to people after 5 o'clock. And so in the meeting, somebody came up with the idea, well, why don't we just get them to transfer their phones to head office, because the head office is open longer. So, you know, it was a 5-minute change, cost nothing, just to put a transfer on the phones, but it made a big difference in terms of actually the perception that the organisation was then open a lot longer and could deal with things. Customers often need more help and information. Again, with one of the insurance clients we work with, they specialised in insuring young drivers, and they had the issue of, you know, how do we actually sort of communicate with people between renewals? So they started doing every quarter. They'd do a particularly, you know, are you prepared for winter driving? You know, tips for winter driving, tips for summer driving, you know, tips, but other things, not just around the whole driving experience, but just sort of some sort of information and some feedback there. And then on the employee side, we do find there's quite often we find that the issues that customers bring up are actually the same as the employees. The employees know what those issues are because they tell us about those as well. And there, that's really a question looking at, is that attitude of empowerment. So is that I know what the issue with that customer is. I could do something about it by choosing not to because it's not my job, or I can hide behind health and safety or GDPR or other regulations. Or is it empowerment where actually I really want to do something? I see they've got a problem. I want to help them, but if I do it, I don't think my boss is going to support me, and I don't feel I'm empowered to do that. So I'm taking a risk, and, you know, am I going to get help? So where are those areas? So what's the employee perspective within there? There's a couple of stats. So we work with a number of different types of organisations. It's just some of the areas there. Anticipate needs. We talked about in terms of, well, how do you actually do that? And sometimes that's simple. So a lot of that's the employee attitude. And in the days when we get out, I remember sitting in a hotel once in Leeds, and I went down to the bar, get something to eat, and walked up and sort of said, got myself a drink, and said, oh, what time do you do do you carry on serving food until? And she said, oh, well, we take orders up until 9 o'clock. I think it's about 8 o'clock at the time. And I sort of, okay, I had a drink, so I looked at the menu, went back and spoke to the same person about 20 minutes later and said, okay, can I order food? And immediately turned around and said, oh yes, you know, we've had a few problems in the kitchen all evening, and so it's taking a lot longer now to order food than you know, all the time it could take, sort of half an hour, 40-minute wait. And I just said to her, well, I had a conversation with you 15 minutes ago. Why didn't you tell me that then? Because I could have ordered then. And it's like, oh, I didn't think about that. You know, you asked me how long we do food till, and that was it. So, you know, she knew there was a problem there. You know, that, again, you know, not a great example in terms of anticipating needs, but it's just, how do you think about, you know, what is the impact on the customer? Being easy to do business with is another area. That's an area actually we find that the travel organisations are really much better at that, and some of the advertising ones are better in terms of the areas. But this is an example again of an organisation that's less relevant now that everything gets paid by credit card. But I had an experience a few years ago when I was just coming down the motorway. I absolutely detest being short of petrol on a motorway and have to go and pay ridiculous motorway prices for petrol. So I pulled into the garage. It was pouring with rain, and I thought I don't want to put on the credit card, so I just put £10 in to get me home. And it hadn't realised I took £10 out of my wallet, walked in there, and it was £10 and a penny. And they said, "Oh no, it's £10." I said, "Look, I've got £10." I had to go back to the car, get my credit card, didn't have the change, come back. People were queuing up. Coincidentally, a week later, I was down in Devon, clients, and I walked in and it actually filled up the whole thing. But there was this there, and that was and I started talking to the guy about this, and it was purely at the initiative of the people there that they put they had what they called the change bot. So if somebody had gone over and it had gone slightly over and it was £10 and a penny or £10 and 5 pence, you could just give them the £10 and then pick that up. And that was funded by the customers. That was actually funded by people who changed. So that's a good idea. I've just put, I've got some change. I'll put it into there. They were raising over £1,000 a year for Devon Air Ambulance just by people doing this. They had a pot by the side of it, so people were putting other change in. And that was driven by the employees. That was just something that the employees did just because they realised that, it just made life easier for people. Treating customers fairly, again, very big in financial services. It's something that a lot of people to do. Again, more than happy to sort of explain and where some of the other services are, ones that get bogged down in numbers at this stage. But Granny Grey is something that Virgin Media use. So Granny Grey is actually it's fixed into all their vans. It's into all their customer ethos, and that's a guy called Sean, who was their customer experience director. The philosophy: how do I get my teams to give a much better service? And his answer was, would you like your mum or your gran treated, or how would you like this? Somebody who's coming round and we're doing this for your mum or your gran. How would you like them to be treated? And that became the whole thing about the Granny Grey. So the influence there was always about, would I want my mum to be treated in this way? No, actually I won't. I'll stop and now think about what I'm doing. And again, it's simple techniques in terms of helping organisations and just getting people to start thinking about it in terms of what they're doing with their customers. And we talked a little about Net Promoter and the willingness to recommend. Net Promoter is, as I say, it comes from some work done by a guy called Fred Reichout and Bain & Co in the United States. They looked at a whole number of different areas in terms of what actually drove loyalty, what made people find, and asked lots of different questions in terms of what was the overall satisfaction, how easy is it to do business with or whatever. And they found that recommending, so how likely are you to recommend? So it's getting a little bit overused at the moment. I think people are a little bit, I don't want to say fed up with it, but I think they're looking at, but it's that question, and but there are some things around that. So one is, that's fine. 9 to 10 is a promoter, so they're the people who you would be working with. So, well, actually, they're our most loyal customers. 7 and 8 are passive, so they're okay, but you're not wowing them. And 6 and below are the problems. Anybody who gives you a 6 or below on that should be phoned up, by somebody in the team. I do it, and with organisations who send me that question, quite often I'll even if I'm happy with them, might give them a lower score, never below a 6. But sometimes if they're bad, I'll give them a 1 or 2, because actually, what are they doing with that? If you're finding that customers are unhappy with you, but you're doing nothing about it, don't be surprised when they walk away. But at the same time, just because you get lots of people who give you a 9 or a 10 doesn't mean they're your sales team. They're not out there promoting you the whole time. It's some organisations think, oh, it's great. We can build businesses around customer referrals. Well, you can, but it's very unlikely in that respect. So, and also, just because they say they'd like to do something and recommend you doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. But again, and this is not just around Net Promoter, but for all customer satisfaction metrics and scores. A score's just a number. It's meaningless unless you actually look for the detail. What does it mean? also how do you compare it to other people. So we do a lot of quantitative and qualitative questions. So a lot of that is in terms of, why did you answer the last questions you did? What is it we're doing right? Because unless you can understand the reasons for the scores, and that is as important to focus about what you do well as what you do badly. So getting lots of 9s and 10s is great for the ego, but actually why am I getting those 9s and 10s? What is it I'm doing right? And actually, even if I'm doing it right, I'm getting good scores, how can I do it better? So looking at the reasons behind those scores and say following up on the dissatisfaction, and some of the areas there, it's also about sharing that information. So, and again, one of the areas we find with professional services, if we look at the internal, is be very wary about the gap between qualified and non-qualified staff. And that could be, whether it's in, say, it could be in accountants, legals, but even in certain areas, there's people who quite often we find that a lot of discontent from employees, which feeds back to the customers in terms of the professional staff think they're the ones who can be doing, and the others are often seen as being sort of the automans. I have this issue. I'm a school governor and I'm a trustee of a number of schools in Essex, and one of the areas I have there is a lot of it around the teaching. Everyone talks about the teachers, but nobody ever talks about the support staff. And I say a lot, actually, the teachers do a fantastic job, but they wouldn't be able to do that job if they didn't have the support staff. So just because the teachers are on the front line and the teachers are sort of the qualified team, actually it's about the whole school. It's about thinking about all of the school and how all of that works, rather than just sort of individual parts of it. So just conscious of the time. So in terms of gold, we have a gold, silver, or bronze standard in terms of what we do. Just a couple of areas there in terms of, what is it that gets people to get our gold standard? Making it personal is the key thing, I would say. Tailor the service to meet individual needs wherever you can. It's not always easy, but actually, it's about perception as much as reality. So even if it's the same as somebody else might get, actually, how do I make that? How do I make it feel welcome? Some of that can be done in terms of using names. I think one of the things that people really like, and so from a point of view, is actually having being a name and not a number. But also it's about that developing relationships. It's actually taking that time to develop those relations over time. But also it's about being consistent. There's no point, you don't just do it once in terms of trying to make a good impression. You've actually got to keep doing it and be consistent and make sure that everyone in the organization is doing the same. Managing expectations is one of the key areas there in terms of over delivering rather than over promising, and that's really some of the areas. We often find we work with one of the insurance companies we work with, does a lot around subsistence and subsidence, and that looks at one of the areas there is if you make a claim in that area, nothing is going to happen for 3 to 4 months because they need to measure it, they need to look at it. But so often, and when we work with this, all customers were just saying, well, nothing's happened because they weren't told up front, they weren't given the expectation. And I mentioned earlier about dealing with Amazon and people wanting things quickly. Actually, that can't always be done. But if you tell them, is it going to be done? Well, actually, that's going to take me 2 or 3 days to find out that information, but I'll call you back on Monday of next week. Now, obviously, the key thing is then making sure you do it, but actually setting an expectation. So I'm not expecting a call back that afternoon. Empowering staff to take ownership is one of the areas. One of the key drivers of customer satisfaction is first contact resolution. So organisations don't want to go around the house, or people don't want to go around the houses now. They really want to sort of try and get their problems solved as quickly as possible. Make sure that the staff are empowered and actually put the people who can help in the positions where they can help. Quite often, sort of the experts and the people who can solve the problems are hidden at the back of the organisation. They've got to find sort of 2 or 3 calls before they actually get through to the person. Make those people more visible, and also look at the alternatives. Don't be afraid to discuss the alternatives. And then finally, it's recognising and sharing success and learning from failure. We talk a lot around the employee thing it's about catching people doing things right and rewarding them, recognising them. review good and bad projects. I've done a lot with lots of different organisations. My background is marketing and run lots of marketing campaigns. And actually, I now look back at some of the things I've done. We often have, really look, if something's gone badly, we spend a lot of time sort of looking into in detail. But if something went well, we thought, well, it went well, let's move on to the next one. We never actually reviewed what was it that made it good, what was it that made that successful, how can we build on that, how can we share that. And again, sharing information around the organisations, or actually in groups like this, we find with a lot of the network groups, a lot of organisations, actually, it's really helpful and really cathartic in terms of, sort of sharing information and being brave enough to share bad experiences as well, so other people don't learn from those mistakes, and actually talking about some of the issues that have. One of the things we find is that it doesn't really matter whether we're working with a glass manufacturing business, a boutique wealth management business, an IT software company. Quite a lot of the issues they're having are the same in that business. So actually being prepared to share and being prepared to talk and look about those experiences, bouncing ideas off other people in forums such as this one. So what is it that makes it customer experience effective and also internally? So very much it's around, it's getting the right people to do the right thing at the right time. So actually, are the employees customer focused? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know what they can help? Can they do it? And can they do it at the right time in terms of the ensuring that the customer is looked after at the time where they want to be looked after? So we look at 4 key areas, and again, it's more than happy to talk about our business, but this is more about sort of the general customer experience type scenario. So we look at a delve, which is an annual deep dive of internal and external gaps. We look at regular time feedbacks. We work with people on sort of monthly work, but we also help design and develop the strategy and look at the training. And one of the areas that we often talk about in terms of the feedback is, what's the cost of this? Can we do this ourselves? And one of my favourite quotes is from Arthur Nielsen, which is the price of light is less than the cost of darkness, which is, it may cost you a little bit to find out, but actually it's far better to know than not to know. But as I mentioned earlier, also very much in terms of, we work with partners, we can't do everything ourselves. And one of the areas that we look at in terms of, it's not just how can we help people, so how can we help you or your customers, but how can you help our customers? So again, we partner with training companies, we partner with consultants, we partner with organizations, and often some of the issues that get thrown up, it could be around communication, it could be around other areas, and it's very much so well, actually, we don't do that, but we know somebody who can. So it's working with business partners who can actually come in and solve some of our customers' problems for them in a way. So if anybody will want a conversation about sort of looking at ways that we could collaborate, I think it was Andy who made the comment earlier about so collaboration is really important to the different businesses, and I think it's we are very much sort of the mindset of let's get the experts to get the best. If we can't do it ourselves, then the next best thing is to know somebody who can do it. So I've rushed through that fairly quickly. Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. Sort of conscious of the fact it's sort of now 9:40, people get on with their business day, but more than happy to take questions or sort of my details there. If anybody wanted to sort of contact me, either directly or through Chris, then more than happy to have a chat about really just sort of, what it can mean for your business. Just talking, just really, if you've got some customer feedback, what does that mean? Put it into context. More than happy to do that for you.
So thanks, Tony. That was really good.